we've seen an increase in the response from the federal government in terms of these protests. How does that play out legally, or what do you see legally behind this?
Well, a lot of people really don't understand federalism, and that's really what this whole thing is about. And to understand federalism, you have to understand that the federal government and the states, they have a very unique relationship. In order for it to work, they have to agree to work in this delicate, dance, and that the state sometimes will give up its sovereignty willingly, voluntarily, in order so the federal government can take over. So there are certain fields and industries, for instance, that the federal government has decided to take over completely, and the states really have no say. For instance, aviation. Right? Remember on 9/11, was every plane was ordered to hit
ground.
They were ordered to find the nearest airport and land.
Right.
Because the federal government said so. They're in complete control of aviation.
Gotcha.
They're also in complete control of securities law. They're also in complete control of coining money. And a lot of times the states and the federal government share power. Police, for instance, we have local law enforcement, the sheriff's office, we have the FDLE,
right.
And the federal government also has their own police force.
Sure.
And there are certain things that the states do exclusively of the federal government. For instance, there's no such thing as federal divorce law, right?
True.
Because the feds, they don't want to mess with that.
Right.
So, but in order for all this to work, it has to work under a theory, a concept called federalism, in which the states and the federal government agree to support each other, right? I mean, that's how it can only work. That's why
in conjunction.
That's why the Articles of Confederation failed, because that was our first attempt at forming a government. It only lasted 8 years. The Constitution was our second attempt at forming a government. The first line of the Constitution, in order to form a more perfect union. And, the Constitution addressed many things that the Articles of Confederation didn't actually even think about. Something like coining money, for instance. Right. States were allowed to coin their own money. But, a lot of people don't understand that the President of the United States is the highest-ranking federal executive officer. He is the equivalent to Governor DeSantis in the state of Florida, because Governor DeSantis is the highest-ranking state constitutional officer.
Okay.
So they have the same amount of powers, except one is at the federal level and one is at the state level. And, the optics on the president sending in the military to a state are horrendous.
Right.
What if the military doesn't want to do it? And he is the commander-in-chief. But there is also an insurrection act where the president's allowed to send out military in order to, quell a rebellion or an insurrection. But that's been used very, very sparingly throughout this country's history. So what can the president do? Well, as far as any federal property or a federal employee, federal officers, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a federal enclave.
Proper.
So he's allowed to do anything when it comes to that because he is the highest-ranking federal executive officer.
Okay.
So a lot of people think that, he can do almost anything he wants. He just decides not to. Well, that's not true. It's certain things he can and can't do. I mean, it would be horrible for him to tell every state in the union to shut down. The governors can say, yeah, I don't think so.
Right.
Or, yes, we'll follow your advice. Thank you, Mr. President. So it's a very delicate balancing act filled with a lot of different, legal encumbrances.
Can you recall a time in the past with a similar situation? Was there a previous? I mean, of course, my historical knowledge is not as great as yours.
The most famous is Dwight Eisenhower sending in the military after the U.S. Supreme Court just ruled on Brown versus Board of Education.
Oh, yeah.
That segregation among the schools was unconstitutional.
So federal got involved federally.
Well, because the governor said, we're not having any black children attend any white schools.
Gotcha.
And Eisenhower said,